They thought he was poor, until he paid for 30 tractors in cash and left everyone speechless. He arrived in an old pickup truck, worn-out clothes and a straw hat, and they treated him like a joke. They laughed, mocked him, called him crazy, until the bank confirmed the millionaire transfer. And that day those who mocked him learned the hard way that appearance does not measure greatness. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The morning arrived slowly over Cedar Creek, Iowa, and the May sun began to warm the asphalt of Washington Avenue. The traffic wasn't heavy yet on that Saturday, and the few cars that passed seemed in a hurry to get somewhere. But there was one pickup truck moving at a different rhythm, as if it carried not only the weight of years in its worn-out body, but also the silent burden of a story yet untold. John Harrison held the steering wheel with his calloused hands, hands that knew the earth better than the pavement. At 53, his sun-weathered face held wrinkles that were maps of decades working under the open sky. The engine of the blue 1989 F-150 sputtered from time to time, coughing like an old smoker, and the paint was so faded it was hard to tell if that shade had ever been vibrant. John adjusted the straw hat on his head and took a deep breath. It wasn't the first time he had entered places where he wasn't welcome, but today there was something different in the air. There was a mission. He parked the pickup in front of AgriPro Premium, the most luxurious agricultural machinery dealership in the city. The modern building of mirrored glass reflected the blue sky, and through the enormous windows, one could see the new gleaming tractors arranged like works of art in a museum. John Deere, Case IH, New Holland. Machines that cost the equivalent of several houses, machines that represented the dream of any serious farmer. He got out of the truck slowly, closing the door carefully so as not to strain the already loose hinge. He wore worn-out jeans, a plaid shirt with a few patches on the sleeves, and cracked leather boots. These were not the clothes of someone about to do business. They were the clothes of someone who came from the fields, and that was written in every thread of fabric. The automatic glass door opened with a soft electronic whisper, and John stepped into the dealership's air-conditioned environment. The smell of new cars mixed with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. The floor was light marble, so polished it reflected the ceiling lights. In the center of the showroom, a state-of-the-art green and yellow tractor rotated slowly on a turntable like a jewel displayed in a luxury showcase. 3 salesmen were talking near the service counter. They all wore branded polo shirts with the embroidered logo, dress pants and polished shoes. When John walked in, all 3 looked in the same direction. The first, a young man no older than 25 named Ryan, nudged his colleague and whispered something John couldn't hear, but he could see the mocking smile that formed on both their lips. The third salesman, Mark, a man in his 40s with a prominent belly and gelled hair combed to the side, started walking toward John, but his steps were slow, almost reluctant, as if each yard cost him considerable effort. "Good morning," John said, his voice calm and deep, taking off his hat as a sign of respect. "Good morning," Mark replied, not bothering to hide his bored tone. "Are you looking for something, sir?" The question had a clear subtext. "You should be looking somewhere else." "Came to see the tractors," John answered, gesturing with his hat toward the showroom. "I heard you have the best models in the region." Mark glanced back at his colleagues, and John noticed the exchange of looks. It was the kind of silent communication that needed no words. "Look at this. Another curious guy who's going to make us waste our time." "Look, my friend," Mark began, putting his hands in his pockets and rocking slightly back and forth on his heels. "This equipment here is high-tech, you understand? Not just anyone can operate it. Besides, they are quite significant investments." The word significant was pronounced with special emphasis, as if it were code for too expensive for you. "I understand," John said, remaining calm. "That's exactly why I came to see them up close. I've been farming for over 30 years. I know my way around a tractor, even if mine are much older than these here." "Is that so?" Mark asked, but the interest was fake. "And what do you farm?" "Corn, primarily. Also some soybeans and alfalfa, depending on the season." Mark murmured, as if the information were completely irrelevant. "Look, if you just want to take a look, that's fine, but I have to warn you that we can't spend too much time explaining every detail. if there isn't a real intention. To buy? Time is short and we have other customers. John looked around. There were no other customers in the dealership at that moment. The showroom was empty except for them, but he said nothing. He just nodded. "Could you show me that one over there?" he asked, pointing to a red tractor with an enclosed cab and enormous wheels. Mark sighed discreetly and started walking toward the machine, with John following him. As they walked, John observed every detail of the environment. The walls were decorated with huge photos of cultivated fields, abundant harvests, machines working under the sunset. Everything seemed too perfect, almost unreal, as if farming were a fairy tale where there was no sweat, fatigue, or uncertainty. "This here is the Case IH Puma 185, Mark said, tapping lightly on the side of the tractor, as if introducing a pet. 6-cylinder FPT engine, 185 horsepower, CVT transmission, air conditioning, integrated GPS. It's a complete machine." John got closer, touching the giant tire with the palm of his hand. The rubber was new, the tread pattern still perfect. "And how much does a machine like this cost?" Mark hesitated, as if the question were impertinent. "This specific model goes for $890,000 paid in full, but we also work with financing, obviously. Credit analysis, down payment, all that." John nodded slowly, as if processing the information. $890,000. It was more money than many people saw in their entire lives. He ran his hand along the side of the tractor, feeling the cold metal under his fingers. "Do you have other models?" "We do," Mark replied, not hiding his impatience. "We have the John Deere 6155M over there in the back, and also some New Holland models." "And how many tractors do you have here ready for sale?" Mark frowned. "Ready for sale, we have about 35 in our total inventory. Some are here in the showroom, others in the warehouse." John continued walking, observing each machine. He stopped in front of a yellow tractor, then a green one, analyzing them with a look that Mark couldn't decipher. It was a deep, technical gaze from someone who truly understood the subject. 30 tractors, John repeated, more to himself than to the salesman. "That's right," Mark confirmed. "But look, my friend, as I said, these are high-value pieces of equipment. If you're interested in something more accessible, I can recommend some used tractor dealerships in the area. There are some really good ones, you know. Quality equipment, just older." The suggestion was made with a smile that tried to seem helpful, but was merely condescending. John turned and looked directly into Mark's eyes. For a moment, the salesman felt something strange, an intensity in that gaze that made him uncomfortable. "And what if I wanted to buy them all?" The question hung in the air like a stone in a quiet lake. Mark blinked, confused. "What do you mean, all of them?" "The 30 tractors," John said calmly. "If I wanted to buy all 30, could you deliver?" Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his colleagues, who were now paying attention to the conversation. Ryan and the other salesman, Paul, moved closer. "You're joking, right?" Ryan asked with a wide smile that showed all his teeth. "I don't usually joke about business," John replied. Ryan let out a short laugh and looked at Mark, then at Paul. The three exchanged looks of poorly disguised amusement. "Sir," Ryan said, putting his hands on his hips, "do you have any idea how much that would cost? We're talking about something around $25 million. $25 million. That's more than many companies make in years." "I know how much it costs," John said, unfazed. "And you have $25 million? Paul asked, now also smiling. "Not yet," John answered honestly, "but I will." The answer provoked a burst of laughter. The three salesmen laughed openly, without embarrassment, as if they were watching a comedian at a stand-up show. Mark leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees, as if the laughter were too strong to be contained. "Man," Ryan said, wiping an imaginary tear from the corner of his eye, "that was a good one. That was a really good one." At that moment, a frosted glass door at the back of the dealership opened, and a man in a grey suit appeared. It was Arthur Miller, the dealership's manager, 50, with greying hair combed back, a perfectly adjusted blue tie. He had the air of someone who was used to commanding, deciding, judging. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice firm. Nothing much, boss, Mark said, still smiling. Just a customer who wants to buy all the tractors in the store. Arthur looked at John, sizing him up from head to toe. His eyes scanned the patched shirt, the worn boots, the straw hat. It took him less than 3 seconds to form an opinion. All the tractors, Arthur repeated, with a sardonic smile. Interesting. And have you already gotten a quote? Have you spoken with our finance department? Not yet, John replied. I just came to check out the place first. See how you operate. I see, Arthur said, crossing his arms. And what's your company, if I may ask? What's the name of your farm? It's not exactly a farm, John said. It's a cooperative, the Cedar Creek Family Farmers Cooperative. A cooperative? Arthur repeated, as if the word had a sour taste. So it's a bunch of small producers trying to pool their money. That's right. Arthur gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Look, my friend, I admire the spirit. I really do. But I'm going to be honest with you. What we're selling here isn't for small producers. This is professional high-performance equipment for large properties, understand? It makes no sense for a small farmer to invest in this. It's not sustainable. We know what we're doing, John said. I'm sure you do, Arthur said, in a tone that clearly indicated the opposite. But look, I don't want you to waste your time. If you want to make a modest purchase, 1 or 2 tractors, we can talk. But 30 tractors. That's a conversation for large groups, for investors, for people who really have the structure. John was silent for a moment, observing Arthur. Then he observed the 3 salesmen, who still had restrained smiles on their faces. He knew that look. He had seen that look his entire life. It was the look of someone who saw a man from the country and saw only ignorance, poverty, insignificance. I understand, John said finally. Thank you for your time. He put his hat back on and started walking toward the exit. But before he left, he stopped and turned around. I forgot to leave my contact information, he said, pulling a small paper card from his shirt pocket. It was a simple card, printed on plain paper, with just a name and a phone number. Mark took the card with 2 fingers as if he were afraid of getting dirty. John Harrison, he read aloud with a half-smile. Right, we'll be in touch if an opportunity comes up. Thank you, John said. And then he left. The automatic door closed behind him, and the 4 men stood there in the air-conditioned showroom, with the soft sound of ambient music in the background. Poor guy, Ryan said, shaking his head. He must have seen some movie and thought life was like that. You see all kinds, Paul commented. Thinks he can just walk in and buy 30 tractors like it's 30 bags of feed. Arthur took the card from Mark's hands and looked at it. File this under time wasters, he said, handing the card back. And you guys pay attention. When someone like that comes in, all raggedy, don't waste too much time. It's a waste of energy. The salesman nodded in agreement, and life returned to normal at AgriPro Premium. Outside, John got into his old pickup, started the engine that grumbled before catching, and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, looking at the mirrored building in front of him. He wasn't angry, he wasn't surprised, he was just confirmed. John's house was 40 minutes from the city, on a dirt road that cut through fields of corn. It was a simple, exposed brick house with a red ceramic roof and a front porch where a few plastic chairs rested under the shade of an old maple tree. Chickens pecked in the yard, and a mutt slept curled up near the water tank. When John arrived, it was almost 11 in the morning, and the heat was starting to build. He parked the pickup next to the house and got out, taking off his hat and running a hand through his sweaty hair. Inside, the house, sitting around a worn wooden table, were 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, all ranging in age from 40 to 60. They were faces that also knew the sun, hands that also knew the earth. So? Asked Mrs. Lewis, a short, strong woman with her hair in a bun, who stood up as soon as John entered. How did it go? John pulled up a chair and sat down. It was exactly as we imagined, he said. They don't want us there. A heavy silence filled the kitchen. Mr. Anthony, a thin man with a grey moustache, slammed his hand on the table. I knew it, he said with contained anger. I knew they'd treat us like that. Calm down, Anthony, said Mrs. Lewis, placing a hand on his shoulder. John went there to confirm exactly that. So now what? Asked Martha. a woman of about 45 with tired but determined eyes. "Are we really going to do business with these people?" John took a deep breath. "We are," he said, "but on our terms, with our conditions, and by showing them who we are." "And the bank?" asked Joe Carter, a dark-skinned man with an easy smile who was now serious. "Did we get the approval?" John shook his head. "Not yet. I called the manager yesterday, and he said the analysis is in progress, but I heard a hesitation in his voice. I think they're reluctant to release the full amount." "Reluctant about what?" Mr. Anthony exploded. "We have collateral, we have property, we have a payment history. What more do they want?" "They want to believe we're capable," John said calmly. "And that, my friend, is something no piece of paper can prove. We have to show them that face to face." Mrs. Lewis sat down again, and everyone fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The Cedar Creek Family Farmers Cooperative had been founded almost 20 years ago, when a group of small producers realized that alone they could never compete with the big guys. United, however, they had strength. They started by sharing old equipment, then resources, then knowledge. Over time, the cooperative grew. Now there were 60 families, all working in harmony, sharing profits and losses fairly. And after years of saving, of sacrifices, of sleepless nights, they had finally gathered the money to take the next big step, to completely renew their fleet of machinery. 30 new tractors, one for every 2 families. It was the difference between continuing to survive and starting to thrive. But the road to get there had been long and difficult. John remembered the first meeting, 3 years ago, when he proposed the idea. Many had doubted. How could they, simple farmers, raise millions of dollars? But John had a plan. And more importantly, he had the people's trust. "I'm going to Chicago," John said, breaking the silence. "I'm going to speak with the bank's board personally. I'll take all the documents, all the proof that we are a safe investment." "When?" Martha asked. "Monday morning. I've already scheduled the meeting." "Want me to go with you?" Joe Carter offered. "No," John said. "You stay here and coordinate the harvest. Life can't stop because of this. But I want Henry Taylor to go with me." Henry Taylor was the cooperative's lawyer, a young man who had recently graduated and decided to return to the region where he grew up to help those who needed it most. He was the bridge between the farmer's world and the world of contracts, banks, and bureaucracy. "Does he—" "No?" Mrs. Lewis asked. "I'll call him this afternoon." Everyone nodded. The plan was set. In the late afternoon, John walked to the small shed behind his property. It was where they kept the tools, the seeds, the bags of fertilizer. But it was also where, for the last 3 years, he had set up a small makeshift office, a wooden table on 2 sawhorses, a plastic chair, and a file folder full of papers. There were spreadsheets, contracts, payment receipts, bank statements. Everything meticulously organized, everything documented with the care of someone who knew that one mistake could cost everything. He sat down and opened the folder, running his fingers over the documents. There lay the fruit of decades of work, not just his, but everyone's. Every number on those spreadsheets represented sweat, hope, dreams. He thought of his father, who had spent his whole life breaking his back on someone else's land, never owning anything of his own. He thought of his mother, who woke before the sun to cook and care for the children before heading out to the fields. He thought of the children he never had, but who now existed in the form of all the cooperative's children, boys and girls growing up, watching their parents fight for dignity. John was not a man of many words. He wasn't eloquent. He didn't know how to give speeches. But he knew how to work, and he knew how to organize. And most importantly, he knew how to listen. He closed the folder and looked out the small shed window. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and red. The cornfields swayed gently in the evening breeze. Tomorrow would be Sunday, a day of rest, but on Monday the battle would resume. And this time John Harrison was determined not only to win, but to prove that greatness was not measured by appearance, but by character. The Greyhound bus left Cedar Creek at 5:30 on Monday morning, cutting through the darkness, still clinging to the Iowa country roads. John sat by the window, watching the city lights fade behind him, while Henry Taylor, beside him, organized a brown leather briefcase full of documents. Henry Taylor was 28, but his youthful face hid a determination that impressed those who knew him. The son of a rural teacher and a public school lunch. Lady, he had been the first in his family to go to college. He graduated from law school with a full scholarship, and when everyone expected him to move to Chicago or join a big firm, he surprised them all by returning to the region where he grew up. Nervous? Henry asked without taking his eyes off the papers. A little, John admitted. I don't go to the big city much. I know, Henry said, finally looking at him. But you'll see, John. When they read this, they'll realize we're not playing around. He tapped the briefcase lightly, confidently. John nodded but said nothing. He looked out the window again. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the horizon in shades of pink and gold. It was a new day, a new chance. 3.5 hours later, the bus arrived at the terminal in Chicago. The contrast was brutal. They left the silence of the countryside for the urban chaos of one of North America's largest metropolises. Crowds moved in every direction, talking on cell phones, carrying suitcases, running to catch buses. The smell was different. Exhaust fumes mixed with coffee, fast food, cheap perfume. John held the strap of his old backpack tightly, feeling like a fish out of water. But Henry, who knew the city well from his college days, walked with confidence. "We'll take the L train," he said. "It's faster." They entered the bowels of the station, descending escalators that led to a subterranean world of white tiles and the roar of trains. John had never ridden a subway in his life. He was impressed by the number of people, the speed, the cold efficiency of the system. 40 minutes later, they were on LaSalle Street, the financial heart of the city. Enormous. Glass buildings rose like mountains of concrete and steel, partially blocking the sunlight. Men and women in suits walked hurriedly, all seeming to have important and urgent destinations. The National Rural Development Bank was in one of these buildings, a 23-story edifice with a mirrored facade that reflected the clouds. In the lobby, a security guard in a blue uniform checked their IDs before granting them access to the elevators. 21st floor, the guard said, bored. In the elevator, John felt his stomach tighten. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something deeper. It was the awareness that what would happen in the next few hours could change the future of 60 families. He could not fail. The elevator door opened onto a hallway, lit by cold LED lights, with white walls decorated with abstract paintings that John couldn't understand. A blonde receptionist in a grey suit greeted them with a professional smile. "Good morning, how can I help you?" "We have a meeting scheduled with Mr. Stephen Croft," Henry said, showing a printed confirmation. "1 moment, please." She typed something into her computer, made a quick call, and then pointed to a set of black leather armchairs. "You can have her seat. He's been notified." John and Henry sat side by side. The environment was silent, almost frighteningly so, only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional click of the receptionist's keyboard. 5 minutes passed, then 10, 15. "This is taking a while," John murmured. "It's normal," Henry said. "They always make you wait. It's part of the power play." John didn't like that. He didn't like the idea that everything was a game. For him, this wasn't a game. It was life. It was the future. Finally, after 20 minutes, a wooden door opened, and a man of about 50 appeared. Navy blue suit, red tie, perfectly cut grey hair. Stephen Croft had the bearing of someone accustomed to denying requests. "Mr. Taylor?" he said, extending his hand. "That's me," Henry replied, shaking his hand firmly. "And this is Mr. John Harrison, president of the Cedar Creek Family Farmers Cooperative." Stephen looked at John, appraising him quickly. John noticed the look, recognized the judgment. It was the same look from the dealership. "A pleasure," Stephen said, shaking John's hand without much enthusiasm. "Please come with me." They followed him down a corridor to a meeting room. It was a large space with a glass table, leather chairs, and an entire wall of windows offering a stunning view of Chicago. You could see buildings stretching to the horizon, an urban sea of concrete. "Have a seat," Stephen said, pointing to the chairs on one side of the table. He sat on the other side, and 2 more men entered the room. They introduced themselves as credit analysts from the bank. One was young, with glasses, holding a laptop. The other was older, with a neatly trimmed beard and a permanently skeptical expression. "So," Stephen began, lacing his fingers on the table, "you've requested a $16 million loan for the acquisition of agricultural machinery. Is that correct?" "Exactly," Henry said, opening his briefcase and starting to take out documents. "But before we get into the financial details, I'd like to provide some context." Stephen gestured with his hand as if to say, "Go ahead," but his face showed no interest. Henry began to speak. He explained the history of the cooperative, the years of working together, the successes achieved, the transparent management, the impeccable payment history. He showed spreadsheets detailing production over the last 5 years, contracts with buyers, growth projections. Every number was there, documented, proven. The younger analyst took notes. The older one just watched, his skeptical expression unchanging. "It's an impressive portfolio," Stephen said when Henry finished. "But you must understand our position. 16 million is a substantial amount, and the nature of your business, well, family farming is a volatile sector, dependent on weather, on harvests, on market fluctuations." "All agriculture is dependent on that," John said, speaking for the first time in the meeting. Everyone looked at him. "The big farmers also face drought, excessive rain, pests. The difference is that we are 60, families working together. If one family has a problem, the others support them. That makes us stronger, not weaker." The older analyst raised an eyebrow. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrison," he said, in a tone that held no respect at all, "the bank needs concrete guarantees. Feelings of solidarity don't pay off debts." "We're not asking for charity," John said, maintaining his calm. "We're asking for a loan that will be paid back with interest, and we have the collateral, our properties, our history, our future contracts." "Small properties," the analyst said. "Added together, yes, they amount to a considerable value, but they're scattered. 60 different properties, 60 different deeds. If there's a default, the foreclosure process would be a logistical nightmare." Henry intervened. "That's precisely why we've structured the operation so that the cooperative as a legal entity is the primary debtor. The properties serve as subsidiary collateral, but the responsibility lies with the cooperative. This simplifies the entire process." Stephen leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Mr. Taylor, I'll be frank with you. The credit committee reviewed your request last week, and the initial recommendation was for partial approval. 8 million, not 16. The silence that followed was heavy. "Half?" John said, incredulous. "Half doesn't solve our problem. We need 30 tractors. With half the money we buy 15, and then half the families are left without equipment." "I understand the frustration," Stephen said, "but it's a matter of risk management. The bank can't overexpose itself to a single client, especially in a sector that's so—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "So what?" John asked, a challenging tone in his voice. "So poor? Is that what you mean?" Stephen looked uncomfortable. "That's not what I said." "But it's what you meant," John insisted, leaning forward. "You look at me, you see these clothes, you see where I come from, and you think we're no good. You think we're high risk because we don't wear suits, don't have important last names, don't frequent the same places you do." "Mr. Harrison," the older analyst tried to interrupt, but John didn't stop. "We may not have diplomas hanging on the wall, but we know how to work. We wake up before the sun and go to bed after the moon. We know the land, we know the rain, we know the drought. And more importantly, we pay what we always have, always will." Henry placed a hand on John's arm, trying to calm him, but John was somewhere else now. He was tired of being looked down upon, tired of having to prove the obvious. "Look here," John said, pointing to the pile of documents on the table. "This isn't just paper. This is the life of 60 families. These are children who will be able to get an education because their parents will be more productive. These are elderly people who will be able to rest because their children will have proper equipment. It's dignity, it's justice. And you're telling me it's only worth half?" Stephen was silent. The older analyst looked away. The young one stopped typing. It was Henry who broke the silence. "Mr. Croft," he said, his voice firm but controlled, I understand the bank's concerns, I truly do. But I need you to understand something as well. This is not an ordinary request. This cooperative represents something bigger. It represents the possibility for small producers to have access to the same level of technology as the large ones. And if the bank denies this, it isn't just denying alone, it's saying that there are people who deserve to prosper and others who do not. He opened another folder and took out more documents. Here is a feasibility study done by an independent consulting firm. Here are letters of intent to purchase from 3 major food distributors. Here is a technical report on the soil quality of the cooperative's properties. All of this was done to prove that we are not improvising. We have a plan, a solid plan. Stephen took the documents and began to flip through them. He read in silence for a few minutes. The analysts also moved closer to... See? This is impressive, Stephen admitted finally. You've done your homework. We've done more than our homework, Henry said. We've done everything any large corporation would do. The only difference is that we're small. But being small doesn't mean being incapable. Stephen closed the folder and looked directly at John. Forgive my frankness, but when you walked in here, I confess I wasn't optimistic. I see many requests every day, and most are from unprepared people, dreaming big but without the structure. You are different. We don't want special treatment, John said. We want fair treatment. Stephen nodded slowly. I'll do this, he said. I will take this additional material to the credit committee today. I will personally recommend the full approval of the 16 million. But I have to be honest. I cannot guarantee the committee will agree. When will we have an answer? Henry asked. By Wednesday. I'll do my best to expedite it. John and Henry exchanged glances. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was something. We appreciate your time, Henry said, standing up and extending his hand. Stephen shook it, this time with more force, with more respect. When they left the building, the midday sun was beating down on the asphalt of LaSalle Street. The heat was intense, but John barely felt it. He was processing everything that had happened. You did very well in there, Henry said. I lost my temper, John said with a half smile. I shouldn't have spoken like that. Yes, you should have, Henry said. Sometimes the truth needs to be spoken with emotion. Numbers and papers convince the mind, but emotion moves the heart, and at the end of the day, even bankers have hearts, at least some of them. They laughed and the tension finally began to dissipate. Let's get lunch, Henry suggested. I know a place nearby that serves good home-style food. They walked a few blocks to a small restaurant hidden among the skyscrapers. It was one of those places that survived in the middle of the concrete jungle, keeping alive a tradition of simple, honest food. Rice, beans, steak with onions, cornbread. Food that made John feel at home. While they ate, Henry received a call. He answered, talked for a few minutes, and when he hung up, he was smiling. That was my girlfriend, he said. Marcella, she's anxious to know how the meeting went. You're lucky, John said. A woman who cares about your work. I am, Henry agreed. She's a teacher at a rural school, near the cooperative. I met her last year at a county fair. Since then, I can't stop thinking about her. John smiled. It was good to see happiness in someone so young. It was a reminder that there were still good things in the world, things worth fighting for. And you, John? Henry asked. Never married? Almost, John said with a distant look. Many years ago, I was dating a young woman named Helen. She was a teacher, too. We were going to get married, but life had other plans. What happened? John was silent for a moment, stirring the beans on his plate. She wanted me to leave the farm, wanted us to live in the city, for me to get a steady job. But I couldn't. The land was part of me. So she left, went to Chicago to make a life for herself. I heard she got married, had kids. I hope she's happy. And you never regretted it? Every day, John admitted. But not my choice. I regret not being able to make her understand that my love for the land didn't mean I didn't love her. But I was young, I didn't know how to express those things. Henry said nothing, just listened. Sometimes listening was the best thing one could do. They finished lunch and returned to the bus terminal. The trip back was quieter. Both were tired, each lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived back in Cedar Creek, The sun was already setting. John got off the bus, said goodbye to Henry, and walked to the old pickup he had left in the parking lot. Before starting, the engine. He sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, looking at the sky changing colors. Wednesday, 2 days to go. 2 days to find out if dreams became reality or if they went back to being just dreams. He turned the key and the truck coughed before starting. He drove back home as night fell over the cornfields and the stars began to appear one by one in the infinite sky. Wednesday dawned with a cloudy sky, threatening rain. John woke up before 5, as always, but he didn't go out to the fields. He stayed in the kitchen, drinking bitter black coffee, looking out the window at the yard where the chickens were beginning to peck. His cell phone was on the table, and he glanced at it every few seconds, as if he could make it ring by the force of his will. Mrs. Lewis arrived around 7, bringing fresh bread from the bakery. She walked in without knocking, as she always did, and found John still sitting in the same position. "Still nothing?" she asked, placing the bread on the table. "Nothing," John replied. "It's going to work out," she said with a conviction John wished he had. "I have faith." "Faith is good," John said, "but business needs numbers too." Mrs. Lewis smiled and poured herself some coffee. "You're too by the book, John. Sometimes I think you don't believe in miracles." "I do," he said, "but I also believe a miracle is when you work so hard that luck has no choice but to show up." She laughed at that, a warm laugh that filled the kitchen with life. At 9:43 in the morning, the phone finally rang. John looked at the screen and saw the Chicago area code. His heart leaped. He answered on the third ring, trying to control his voice. "Hello? Mr. Harrison?" It was Stephen Croft's voice. "Good morning." "Good morning, Mr. Croft." "I have news. The credit committee met last night and reviewed all the material we presented. There were hours of discussion, many questions raised, but—" John held his breath. "But the request was approved, in full, 16 million. For a moment, John couldn't speak. Mrs. Lewis, who was watching every micro-expression on his face, brought a hand to her mouth. "Mr. Croft," John said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "you don't know what this means. To us." "I do," Stephen said, and for the first time since they had met, his voice had something close to emotion. "Congratulations, Mr. Harrison. You deserve it. When can we formalize it?" "Tomorrow, if you like. I've expedited all the paperwork. You can come here, or if you prefer, I can send everything by email for digital signature." "Let's do it digitally," John said. "The faster, the better." "Perfect. I'll send the documents by the end of the day. Mr. Taylor already has all the necessary information. As soon as you sign, the funds will be released within 48 hours. They said their goodbyes, and when John hung up the phone, his hands were shaking. Not from nervousness, but from relief, from joy, from victory. Mrs. Lewis came over and hugged him tightly. I told you it would work out." John returned the hug, and for the first time in many years he felt tears welling in his eyes. They were good tears, the tears of someone who had carried an enormous weight and could finally set it down. The news spread through the cooperative like wildfire. In less than an hour, John's house was full. Mr. Anthony, Martha, Joe Carter, and a dozen other people, all wanting to confirm if it was true. And when John confirmed it, the celebration began. But John, in the midst of all that joy, kept a cool head. The battle was not yet won. Now they had to complete the purchase, and he knew exactly how to do it. On Friday morning, John called AgriPro Premium. The person who answered was Ryan, the youngest salesman. "AgriPro Premium, good morning." "Good morning," John said, keeping his voice neutral. "My name is John Harrison. I was there last week. I left a card." "Oh," Ryan said, and John could practically hear the disinterest in his voice. "Yes, I remember. What can I do for you?" "I'd like to speak with the manager. It's about a large purchase." "How large?" 30 tractors." There was a silence on the other end of the line. "Look, Mr. Harrison," Ryan said with a sigh, "I don't want you to waste your time. As my manager explained, equipment of this magnitude requires—" "It requires money," John interrupted. "I know, and I have it. The funds have been approved by the bank, $16 million released. In 48 hours. Now are you going to put me through to your manager, or do you want to lose the biggest sale in your company's history? Another silence. Longer this time. One moment, please. The line went on hold, and an annoying instrumental song began to play. John waited patiently, imagining the chaos his words must have caused on the other side. Less than a minute later, a different voice came on the line. It was Arthur Miller, the manager. Mr. Harrison? Arthur Miller, manager at AgriPro. Ryan passed on the information. You really have credit approval for 16 million? I do. I can send you the bank's release document if you'd like to verify. No, Arthur said quickly, and John could hear the complete change in his tone of voice. I trust your word. When would you like to come in to discuss the details of the purchase? Monday morning, 8 o'clock. Perfect. I will be here to receive you in the best possible way. I will be accompanied by my lawyer, John said, and a specialist in agricultural machinery. I hope that's not a problem. No problem at all, Arthur said enthusiastically. The more qualified people, the better. We want you to be completely confident in the quality of our products. Excellent. See you Monday then. See you Monday, Mr. Harrison. And may I say, it's an honor to do business with you? John smiled to himself. You may. See you Monday. He hung up the phone and looked at Henry, who was sitting across the table, having heard the entire conversation. They've changed their tune, Henry said. Money works miracles, John said. But I still don't trust them. That's why I need you and Joe Carter to come with me. Joe knows. Tractors like nobody else. If there's anything wrong with those machines, he'll find it. Henry nodded. I'll prepare a very specific contract, with clauses for warranty, technical support, and replacement in case of defects. We won't leave anything to chance. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. The weekend was spent in preparation. Joe Carter made a list of everything he needed to check on each tractor. Henry drafted a 23-page contract with every protection he could think of. John organized the bank documents, the necessary powers of attorney, and mentally prepared for the confrontation, because that's what it would be. Not a friendly negotiation, but a confrontation. A confrontation between those who had money and those who had dignity. And John was determined to prove that dignity was worth more. Monday arrived with a bright sun. John, Henry, and Joe Carter set out together in the F-150, which John had washed and waxed especially for the occasion, not because he wanted to impress, but because he wanted to show that he took care of what was his, that he respected his things, no matter how old they were. When they arrived at AgriPro Premium, the reception was completely different. Before they even got out of the truck, Arthur was already at the door with a wide smile and open arms. Mr. Harrison, he exclaimed, as if they were old friends. What a pleasure to have you back. The three salesmen stood behind him, all smiling, all dressed in their best clothes. There was even a secretary with a tray of coffee and cookies. Good morning, John said, shaking Arthur's hand without showing much emotion. Good morning. Come in, come in. We've prepared the VIP meeting room for you. They were led to a room John didn't even know existed. It was spacious with a fine wood table, upholstered chairs, and even a digital whiteboard on the wall. There was water, coffee, juices, and a selection of snacks artfully arranged. Please, make yourselves comfortable, Arthur said, gesturing broadly. Anything you need, just ask. John, Henry, and Joe Carter sat on one side of the table. Arthur and the three salesmen sat on the other. The contrast was stark. Before, John was just an inconvenience. Now he was treated like royalty. So, Arthur began, clasping his hands, let's talk business. 30 tractors, correct? Correct, John said. We have several models available. We can put together a varied package with different specifications for different needs. Or if you prefer, we can standardize everything. What do you think is best? Before John could answer, Henry intervened. Before we discuss models, we need to establish the terms of the purchase. He opened his briefcase and took out the contract. I've prepared a contract that specifies all of our expectations. I'd like you to read it before we proceed. Arthur took the document and began to read. As his eyes scanned the pages, his expression changed. The smile faded. His brow furrowed. This is quite detailed, he said finally. Yes, Henry said. That's how we do business, with clarity and transparency. Arthur read a few more paragraphs and stopped at a specific section. It says here that any member of the cooperative will receive priority service in case of need for parts or repairs within 24 hours. Exactly, Henry said. It's a non-negotiable condition. But that's very specific. Sometimes parts take time to arrive, you understand. We understand, John said, leaning forward. But if you want our 16 million, then you need to guarantee that we will be treated as important clients, not as a favor, as a right. Arthur swallowed hard. Of course. I'll have to consult my superiors about some of these clauses, but I think we can reach an agreement. Good, Henry said. In the meantime, we'd like to inspect the tractors you intend to sell us. Inspect? Asked Mark, one of the salesmen. But they're all brand new, 0 miles. Joe Carter, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. New doesn't mean perfect. I want to check every machine personally. Arthur hesitated, but the smile quickly returned. Of course, Ryan, please take the gentlemen to the warehouse. Show them whatever they want to see. Ryan, who weeks ago had laughed at the idea of John buying tractors, was now extremely solicitous. Follow me, please. They were taken to the warehouse at the back of the dealership. It was a huge, high-ceilinged shed where dozens of tractors were parked. The smell of oil and new metal filled the air. Joe Carter began his work. He was not just a farmer. He was a self-taught mechanic who had spent his life repairing and maintaining equipment. He knew tractors like a surgeon knows the human body. He started with the first tractor, a green and yellow John Deere. He climbed into the cab, checked the controls, tested the steering. He got down and went to the back, analyzing the hydraulic system, the connections, the tires. Then he moved to the engine, opening the hood and checking every component. This one's good, he said after 20 minutes. Next. The process repeated. Tractor by tractor, Joe examined everything with impressive thoroughness. Ryan, who was accompanying them, started to get impatient. Mr. Carter, he said, this is going to take all day if we go at this pace. Would you rather we buy faulty equipment and come back to complain later? Joe asked without even looking at him. Ryan didn't answer. When they reached the 15th tractor, a red Case IH, Joe stopped. He spent more time than usual analyzing the hydraulic system. Then he asked for a flashlight and shone it on a specific area underneath the machine. John, he called out, his voice serious, come take a look at this. John crouched down beside him. Joe pointed to a hydraulic connection. See this weld here? It's been redone, and poorly. How do you know? From the color of the metal and the finish. This was welded recently, probably to patch a leak. And look here, he pointed to another spot. There's residue of dried oil. This tractor had a problem and they covered it up. John felt anger rising. Are there more? John asked, but he was looking directly at Ryan. Let's see, Joe said. He checked the next tractor and the next. On the 20th tractor, he found another problem. This time, a crack in the chassis that had been filled with putty and painted over. This is serious, Joe said. A crack in the chassis compromises the entire structure. If we use this machine for heavy work, it could break in half in the middle of a field. John looked at Ryan, who was pale. Did you know about this? I don't know exactly where these tractors came from. They arrive and we sell them, you know? No, John said, his voice cold as ice. I don't understand. You were trying to palm off defective tractors on us, machines that could cause serious accidents. It must be a mistake, Ryan said nervously. Let's go back and talk to Arthur. I'm sure we can sort this out, back in the meeting room. John walked in with Joe and Henry behind him. Arthur stood up immediately with that automatic smile. So, everything all right with the equipment? Nothing is all right, John said. 2 of the tractors have serious defects that were hidden, bad welds disguised cracks. Arthur's smile froze. That must be a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, Joe said. It's fraud. You tried to sell defective equipment as new. Look, I can explain, Arthur began, but Henry cut him off. You don't need to explain. You need to replace them. Those 2 tractors are not part of the purchase. You will replace them with machines in perfect condition, or the deal is off." Arthur looked at the salesman, then back at John. Of course. We'll replace them. No problem. It was a mistake from the supplier, you see. Sometimes they send demonstration units mixed in with the new ones and—" "Spare me the excuses," John said. "I just want the replacements, and I want a full documented inspection of all the other tractors, with a technical report. That will take time." "I have time," John said, crossing his arms. "And until we are absolutely certain of the quality of every single machine, we're not signing anything." Arthur realized he had no choice. "All right, I'll hire an independent inspector today. In 3 days, we'll have the complete report." "Perfect," Henry said. "In the meantime, I'll review a few points in the contract. We'll meet again on Friday. If everything is in order, we'll close the deal. If not, we'll find another dealership." The threat was clear and effective. John, Henry, and Joe Carter left AgriPro Premium under the tense gazes of the salesman. When they got into the pickup, Joe was the first to speak. They were going to screw us. If we hadn't checked, we would have bought junk tractors. "I know," John said. "That's why we have to be smarter than them." As he drove back, John thought about everything that had happened. Every obstacle, every sign of disrespect, every attempt to deceive them. And the more he thought, the more certain he was of one thing. They weren't just buying tractors. They were buying dignity. They were buying respect, and they were going to make sure every penny was worth it. On Friday, the technical report was ready. 28 tractors were perfect. 2 had been replaced. Everything documented, everything certified. The contract was signed at 2 o'clock that Friday afternoon. $16 million transferred via wire, with all the cooperative members as virtual witnesses through a video call. When Arthur saw the money enter the dealership's account, his hand trembled as he signed the final delivery document. It was the biggest sale in the company's history, and it had been made by a man he had judged incapable. "Pleasure doing business with you," Arthur said, extending his hand. John shook it, but he didn't smile. "The pleasure is ours. Now you are our suppliers, and you will treat us with the respect we deserve. Any problem, any disrespect toward any member, and this story will spread faster than you can imagine. Understood?" Arthur swallowed hard and nodded. Understood perfectly. John left that room with the feeling that an important battle had been won. But the war for dignity? That was a war that never ended. It just moved to a different field. The day set for the delivery of the tractors was a Monday, the last week of May, when autumn was already beginning to cool the mornings. But on that dawn, the temperature was irrelevant. What mattered was the warmth of anticipation that filled every heart in the family farmers' cooperative. Since 5 in the morning, entire families had begun to gather in the cooperative's central plot, a wide area of packed earth surrounded by trees, where assemblies and parties were usually held. But today was not a party day. Not yet. It was a day of arrival, a day of transformation. John had been there since 4, unable to sleep. He had spent a sleepless night, mentally reviewing every detail of the logistical planning. AgriPro Premium would send 5 car carriers, each, transporting 6 tractors. They would arrive between 9 and 10 in the morning. Each family already knew which machine would be theirs. Everything was organized with the precision of someone who could not afford to make a mistake. Mrs. Lewis arrived with thermoses of coffee and buttered bread. Even in the most important moments, she never forgot that people needed to be cared for. She sat next to John on one of the makeshift wooden benches. "Nervous?" she asked, pouring him some coffee. "A little," John admitted. "It seems unreal, you know. After so much time, dreaming, planning, fighting, it's really happening." "It's because you never gave up," she said, placing her hand on his. "There were people who doubted. There were people who wanted to quit along the way, but you always believed." John looked around. Children ran among the trees, laughing, doing what children do best, turning any moment into a game. Women chatted in groups, some holding babies. Men checked the grounds, ensuring the trucks would have enough space to maneuver. Elderly people sat in the shade, observing everything with shining eyes. Mr. Anthony approached, dragging a lawn chair. "John, I spoke with the folks from the town council. They're coming to take official photos. They want to document this for the city's historical archive." "Document what?" John asked. "We're just getting some tractors." "Don't be modest," Mr. Anthony said. "This is more than tractors. It's proof that small farmers can also grow, can also prosper. This is going to inspire other cooperatives in other regions." John hadn't thought of that. For him, it had always been about his community, his people. But Mr. Anthony was right. They were showing that it was possible. At 8:40, Joe Carter shouted from the entrance gate, "Truck in sight!" A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. People moved toward the gate, forming a human wall of expectation. John stayed where he was, watching. His heart was pounding, but he remained calm. It wasn't time to celebrate yet. He needed to make sure everything went smoothly. The first car carrier entered slowly, carefully, its enormous tires kicking up dust from the road. It was a spectacle to see 6 tractors stacked on that metal structure, like presents waiting to be unwrapped. The colors shone under the morning sun, green, yellow, red, blue. Behind the first truck came the second, then the third, fourth, fifth. 5 giant trucks, each carrying dreams on wheels. When the last truck stopped, there was a moment of silence, and then, as if someone had given an invisible signal, the people began to applaud. The applause started timidly, but quickly grew into an ovation. Clapping, shouts, whistles. Children jumped, women cried, men hugged each other. It was catharsis. It was liberation. John felt his own tears stream down without permission. He didn't try to wipe them away. He wasn't ashamed. Those were tears of pure joy, the kind that only comes after a long struggle. Stepping down from the first truck was Arthur Miller, accompanied by Mark, Ryan, and Paul. They wore AgriPro premium uniforms and carried folders with documents. When Arthur saw the crowd, he stopped for a moment, clearly impressed. John walked up to him, extending his hand. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Welcome to the cooperative." Arthur shook his hand, but he was looking around, seeing the families, the children, the elderly. His face had an expression John couldn't quite decipher. Maybe it was admiration, maybe it was shame. "Mr. Harrison," Arthur said, This is impressive." "It's our community," John said, simply. The truck drivers began to unload the tractors. It was a delicate process, each machine carefully lowered down the hydraulic ramp of the carrier. Joe Carter coordinated the operation, giving instructions, ensuring no one got hurt. As each tractor was unloaded and parked on the grounds, a family would approach. The person responsible for each machine had been chosen by lottery months ago to ensure fairness. When a family's turn came, they walked toward their tractor as if approaching something sacred. John watched as the family of Maria Garcia approached the tractor that would be theirs. Maria was a widow, raising 3 children on her own on a piece of land her husband had left her. She touched the cold metal of the machine with trembling fingers and then turned to her children, all teenagers, and said something John couldn't hear. But he saw when she opened her arms and the 3 of them hugged her, and the 4 of them stood there, united, crying with gratitude. He saw when Mr. Joseph, a 70-year-old man who still worked the land because he couldn't afford to stop, climbed into the cab of the tractor that would be his and sat in the driver's seat. His hands, gnarled by decades of hard labor, caressed the new steering wheel. He stayed there for long minutes, just feeling, just absorbing. When he got down, he had a smile that seemed to light up the whole world. He saw when Martha, who worked from sunrise to sunset to support her elderly parents, received the keys to her tractor. She held them against her chest as if they were the most precious treasure in the world. Because they were. Each delivery was a story. Each family a reason why it had all been worth it. Arthur watched everything in silence. Beside him, Ryan was visibly emotional. John saw the young salesman discreetly wipe away a tear. Mark and Paul also seemed touched, though they tried to maintain a professional demeanor. When all 30 tractors were unloaded and each family had received theirs, John climbed onto a small wooden platform they had set up for the event. The crowd turned to him. "Friends," John began, and his usually quiet voice echoed clearly over the attentive silence. "Today is a day we will remember for the rest of our lives, but I want you to remember one thing. These tractors are not gifts. They are achievements. They are the result of years of hard work, of sacrifice, of unity. Every one of you contributed to this. Every one of you deserves to be here." There was applause, but John raised his hand for silence. He had more to say. "But this is not an end. It's a beginning. These machines will help us produce more, yes. They will help us work better. But the most important thing is what they represent, that when we unite, when we believe in each other, when we refuse to accept that we are less than others, we can achieve anything." More applause, stronger now. "And I want to thank everyone who helped us on this journey. Henry Taylor, who fought for us when the bank hesitated. Joe Carter, who made sure every machine here was perfect. Mrs. Lewis, who kept everyone fed and hopeful. And each and every one of you who never gave up." The ovation was deafening. John stepped down from the platform and was immediately engulfed in hugs. Henry was there, smiling broadly. Mrs. Lewis was crying openly. Joe Carter was laughing and slapping everyone on the back. That's when Ryan approached. The young salesman looked nervous, hesitant. He stopped a few feet from John as if unsure whether to continue. John noticed and walked over to him. "Something you want to say?" John asked. Ryan took a deep breath and looked around, seeing all those people, all those families. I want to apologize," he said finally. "When you came into the dealership that day, I laughed. Me and the others, we laughed because we thought you were nothing, just another lost dreamer. And I was wrong, completely wrong." John remained silent, letting him continue. "Seeing this, today," Ryan went on, his voice beginning to crack, "seeing these families, these kids, these old folks, I realize we judge people for the wrong things. We look at their clothes, their car, the way they talk, but we don't look at their heart, their work, their character. And you have more character than a lot of men in suits that I know." John placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "I accept your apology," he said, "and I thank you for it. But I want you to understand something. I didn't do this to prove anything to you. Did it for my people. That's the difference. We don't work to impress others. We work to take care of our own." Ryan nodded, clearly moved. "Can I do something?" he asked. "What?" "Can I offer to give free training? To teach everyone how to use these machines in the most efficient way? I know you probably already know, but I'd like to help. For real. No commercial interest, just to try to make up for it." John thought for a moment and then smiled. "I accept, but on one condition. You don't come here as a salesman. You come as an apprentice. We'll teach you about life on the farm, and you'll teach us about the technology. Fair?" Ryan smiled, relieved. "Fair." Arthur, who had been watching the conversation from a distance, approached. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" They walked under a tree away from the crowd. Arthur seemed uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I also want to apologize," he said, "and to offer something." "Offer what?" "A true partnership, not just a sale and done. I want AgriPro Premium to be a partner to the cooperative. I'll assign an exclusive team to you, priority technical assistance, training, emergency repairs, and I'm going to train my team to never again judge a customer by their appearance." "And why are you doing this?" John asked directly. "Guilt?" Arthur hesitated and then nodded. "A little, but also because today, seeing this, I understood something I should have understood a long time ago. Real business isn't about taking advantage. It's about building something together. And you are building something incredible here." John observed the manager for a long moment. "All right," he said finally. "I accept your partnership, but on one condition. Any of your employees who treats any member of the cooperative poorly will be banned from doing business with us. Respect is non-negotiable." "I completely agree," Arthur said, extending his hand. They shook hands, but this time it wasn't just a formal gesture. It was a commitment. In the following weeks, the tractors began to work the fields. It was almost magical to see those modern machines traversing lands that for decades had only seen old, outdated equipment. Efficiency increased dramatically. What used to take days now took hours. What used to require 5 people now required 2. The cooperative's productivity doubled in the first month, then it tripled. Contracts with distributors were renewed with higher values. New opportunities arose. An export company got in touch, interested in buying part of their production. With the increased income, improvements began to appear on the properties. Houses were renovated. Schools received donations from the cooperative. A small medical clinic was built with resources shared among the families. Children gained access to computers. The elderly received support for health treatments. But more important than the material improvements was something that couldn't be measured in numbers: dignity. People walked with more confidence. They spoke with more pride. They knew they had achieved something on their own merit, through work, through unity. John continued to wake before the sun, but now when he left his house and looked at the fields, he saw more than crops. He saw a future. He saw hope. One morning, 3 months after the tractors arrived, John received an unexpected call. It was Helen, the woman he had loved decades ago who had left for Chicago. "John," said the voice on the other end of the line, hesitant. "Helen." John could hardly believe it. "How did you get my number?" "I saw a story about the cooperative in the newspaper," she said, "about a group of farmers who made the biggest tractor purchase in the history of Cedar Creek. And when I saw your name, I had to call." "How long has it been?" 32 years, she said with a nervous laugh. 32 years since we last spoke." There was a silence. "You were stubborn," she said finally. "I wanted you to come to the city, to leave the land. But you couldn't, and I couldn't understand. I thought you loved the land more than you loved me." "I loved you," John said, his voice calm but firm. "But I loved the land too, and I couldn't make you understand that one didn't cancel out the other." "I know," she said, "and I've regretted it all these years. I built a good life here, got married, had children, became a school principal, but I always wondered what it would have been like if I had stayed, if I had believed in you. So why are you calling after all this time?" "Because the article made me realize you were right," she said. "You weren't stubborn. You were a visionary. You saw something I couldn't see, that the land wasn't just work, it was community, it was family, it was a future. And you built something incredible, John, something that will last for generations." John felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." "Can I visit you?" she asked. "I'd like to see what you've built, to meet your community." "Of course," John said. "You'll always be welcome." When he hung up the phone, John stood for a long moment looking at the horizon where the sun was, beginning to rise. There was no regret, no sadness, just acceptance. Life had taken them down different paths, and that was okay. 6 months after the tractors arrived, the cooperative organized a big party. They called it the Harvest Festival, but everyone knew it was more than that. It was a celebration of everything they had accomplished, everything they had overcome. The central grounds were decorated with colorful banners, string lights, and long wooden tables. There was food in abundance: roasted pig, rice casserole, fresh salads, cakes, sweets. A small local band played country music, and people danced. Children ran between the tables laughing. The elderly chatted in the shade of the trees, reminiscing about old stories and making plans for the future. Young people discussed planting techniques, the market, opportunities. John was sitting at a table with Mrs. Lewis, Mr. Anthony, Joe Carter, and Henry. Marcella, Henry's girlfriend, was there too, and John noticed the way Henry looked at her. It was the look of someone who had found his place in the world. "You seem happy," John said to Henry. "I am," the young lawyer replied. "I never thought that by coming back here I would find all of this, a cause to fight for, people who value hard work and," he looked at Marcella, "someone to love." Marcella smiled and held his hand. "I'm thinking of asking her to marry me," Henry whispered to John. "What do you think?" "I think you should do it right now," John said with a smile. "Now?" Henry's eyes widened. "Here, in front of everyone?" "Why not?" These people are your family. Our family. Henry thought for a moment, looked at Marcella, and then stood up. He asked the band to stop playing. When the music ceased, all heads turned. "Folks," Henry said, his voice nervous but determined, "can I have your attention for a moment?" The crowd quieted down. "You all know that for the past few years, I've had the honor of working with this cooperative, of getting to know each of you, of being part of this incredible journey, and in the midst of it all, I met someone very special." He turned to Marcella, who was now on her feet, her hands covering her mouth, already understanding what was about to happen. "Marcella," Henry said, his voice now thick with emotion, "you taught me that work isn't just about contracts and numbers. It's about people. It's about community, and you made me want to be a part of this community forever." He got down on one knee and took a small box from his pocket. When he opened it, it revealed a simple but beautiful ring. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, there was silence. Then Marcella screamed, "Yes! Yes! Yes! Yes!" The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Henry stood up, placed the ring on Marcella's finger, and kissed her. People surrounded them, hugging, congratulating, celebrating. John watched it all from a distance with a tranquil smile. This was how it should be. Life, love, community, future. Later that night, as the party began to wind down and people started to leave, John walked alone to where the tractors were parked. 30 silent machines under the moonlight. He touched one of them, feeling the cold metal under his fingers. "You did it, Dad," he murmured, speaking to someone who was no longer there to hear. "You always said the land takes care of those who take care of it, and you were right." He heard footsteps behind him and turned. It was Ryan, the young salesman who now came every week to give free training. "Sorry to interrupt," Ryan said. "Just wanted to say goodbye before I left." "You're not interrupting," John said. "What are you doing here so late?" "I was talking to Joe Carter about hydraulics. He knows things that aren't even in the manuals. It's incredible." John smiled. "He spent 60 years learning by doing. No college teaches that." "I know," Ryan said. "And you know what's funny? I came here thinking I was going to teach you all, but in the end I'm learning a lot more than I'm teaching." "That's the best way to learn," John said. "When you recognize you always have something new to discover." Ryan hesitated, then asked, "Mr. Harrison, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. How did you do it? How did you keep your cool when everyone doubted you? When the bank hesitated? When we laughed in your face when you found the defective tractors? How did you not give up?" John thought for a long moment before answering. "Because I knew I wasn't just fighting for myself," he said finally. "I was fighting for all these people you see here. And when you fight for others, when you have a purpose greater than yourself, giving up is no longer an option. It becomes an impossibility." Ryan nodded slowly, absorbing the words. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me be a part of this, even from a distance." "You're not at a distance," John said. "You're here, and that's what matters." After Ryan left, John stood there for a few more minutes, alone with his thoughts. He looked up at the night sky, at the stars that seemed brighter away from the city lights. He thought about everything that had happened. The old pickup parked in front of a luxury dealership, the disdainful looks from the salesman, the fight with the bank, the discovery of the defective tractors, and finally, the victory. Not just the victory of buying the machines, but the victory of maintaining their dignity throughout the entire process. Because that's what mattered in the end. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the tractors. It was the certainty that they had fought the right way, with honesty, with transparency, with respect for themselves. He began to walk back toward the party, where a few people were still talking, laughing, celebrating. On the way, he passed one of the new tractors and saw reflected in the polished metal the face of a man in a straw hat and simple clothes. It was the same man who had walked into that dealership months ago, but he was also different. Not in appearance, but in what he carried on his shoulders. He no longer carried doubts. He no longer carried worries about being accepted or respected. He carried only the certainty that greatness was not measured by luxury, but by character, and that a person's true worth was in what they built with integrity, not in what they possessed in appearance. John continued walking, and in the distance he heard someone playing a guitar. It was an old song, one his father used to sing on harvest nights. He smiled, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel not just pride or relief, but something simpler and more profound: peace. The peace of someone who knew he had fulfilled his mission, that he had taken care of his own, that he had planted seeds that would grow for generations. And as the moon illuminated the fields and the tractors rested silently, awaiting the next day's work, John Harrison walked back into the party among his people where he had always belonged. Because in the end, that was exactly what the land taught, that greatness is not about being above others, but about being beside them, about growing together, about harvesting together, and that was the greatest harvest of all.